When we think of the Sandworms from Dune, our thoughts are instantly transported to Arrakis. After all, that's the place where they went from being biological entities to Shai Hulud, aka the great divine sandworm whose existence warps space and time. Most Dune fans are aware of the fact that for over 10 millennia, Arrakis has been the home of the Sandworms. But then again, most Dune fans don't go beyond the saga of Paul Atreides in their exploration of Frank Herbert's sci-fi classic. So, in this video, we'll take a look at every single planet where the Sandworms have existed and taken root, because it might just surprise you to know there's more than one. So put on your spoiler hats and strap on your seatbelts, because this is going to be a bumpy ride. Unnamed planet of origin. This might come as a bit of a shock to those of you who have only watched the Dune films, but for book readers, this might not be a surprise. That's because even Frank Herbert's novels acknowledge that sandworms didn't originate on Arrakis. The reason that isn't very clear is that most Dune adaptations don't go beyond the rise of Paul Atreides, and the dialogue corroborating the sandworm's existence on Arrakis as an endemic species comes from Children of Dune, where Paul isn't the main character. In that novel, Paul's son and the true Kwisatz Haderach, Leto II, has a prescient vision about Shai Hulud himself. He realizes that the sand trout, the base organism that turns into the sandworm, was introduced to Arrakis from some other place. This was a wet planet then, he says, as he explains why that memory of them has been forgotten. Turns out, the sand trout proliferated beyond the capability of Arrakis's then existing ecosystem to deal with them. They encysted the available free water, turning Dune into a desert planet, and they did it to survive. On a sufficiently dry planet, they could move to their sandworm phase, which is kind of like a caterpillar's transformation into a butterfly, a natural metamorphosis. And while Frank didn't answer who brought the sand trout to Arrakis, his son did. Brian Herbert's expanded Dune novels are frowned upon by many OG Dune fans, but we can't deny their canonicity, so we must include them in our breakdown. Starting with the Legends of Dune trilogy, Brian has made several references to an ancient and forgotten race called the Muad'Ru. This space-faring, ethno-religious group of wanderers visited many planets before and during the age of the Old Empire. They left behind carvings and runes on some of those planets which foretold future events, because to the Muad'Ru, the future wasn't one thing, it was a tree of several branching possible futures, which sounds a lot like spice prescience if you ask us. Paul and Leto say the same thing about their own visions, and the Muad'Ru having a similar outlook suggests that they ingested a substance similar to spice. In fact, it might just have been spice itself, because in Paul of Dune, it's revealed that they had a secret bunker on Arrakis all along, and that they were the ones who first brought the sand trouts to Arrakis. The Children of Dune miniseries softly confirms this by showing us spirals carved within the walls of hidden caves, and the spiral is said to be a sacred Muad'Ru symbol. No one knows where they came from, how they managed to traverse through the universe without Holtzman engines, or indeed which planet they poached the sand trout off of, but at least now we have a starting point for the sandworm's migratory pattern. As for why they needed to migrate, based on what Leto says about the sand trout's arrival on Arrakis, our best guess is their home world was dying. Leto specifically says that the sand trout ate up Arrakis's water supply to survive, which makes a lot of sense considering the sandworms appear at around the same time the Muad'Ru disappear. So there is some connection between this race of humans, them bringing sand trout to Dune, and their disappearance from the Old Empire as the new world started developing. What that connection is, we don't know. But at least now we know that the sand trout were refugees escaping their homeworld, possibly on account of decreasing living space. Arrakis. After being seeded on Arrakis by the Muad'Ru, sandworms took to its ecology like a glove takes to a hand. Dune was an uninhabited planet for the most part, according to its history. It was located in one of the furthest star systems from the center of the Old Empire, and it was only observed as a curiosity rather than a living space in the beginning. But when the persecution of the Zen Sunni began, thanks to the rise of the Titans and their refusal to fight them, that's when Arrakis started becoming the metaphorical center of the universe. Those sects of Buddha-Islamic religions that managed to escape the Empire's raiders and slavers found their way to Dune, and a few centuries into the Butlerian Jihad, even the enslaved found their way to the Promised Land. Life on Arrakis was as tough as it was brutal. The place had the bare minimum amount of natural resources. It was filled with creatures that wanted to kill every other living creature, and most of all, Arrakis was ruled not by the desert, but by the sandworms, who killed and devoured anything that produced vibration. Existing on a planet that seemed to be hostile to life itself was an impossible task, but the desire for freedom can make the impossible possible. After several decades of figuring out how the planet's ecosystem worked, the Buddha-Islamic residents of Arrakis managed to tame Shai Hulud himself. It started with the outcast Selim Wormrider, who was expelled from his siege for a crime he didn't commit, and who returned to his people not as a destitute with no body, but as a man who bested the very Sandworms that had claimed so many Zensuni lives. Selim fought the injustices of his own past with the help of Shai Hulud, and many people started following him for his display of making the impossible seem possible. From that day forward, they proclaimed that they were part of no empire or imperium, but rather the free men who roamed the deserts of Arrakis, and thus was the Fremen culture incepted. Over the millennia, Fremen culture crystallized around the worship and terror of Shai Hulud, and the Sandworm became at once their weapon, their persecutor, and their source of sustenance. Fremen folk began including spice in their cuisine because it was the most abundant resource they had, and those Fremen blessed with the gift of foresight and prescience became their Sayadinas. When Paul Atreides took over the Imperium, the Fremen exploded across the universe, but the Sandworms became a more marginalized commodity. This is because Paul knew spice was the lifeblood of the Imperium, and to prevent it from being commoditized by anybody that wasn't him, he shut down all spice production and created strict rations for every major player within the Imperium. His son Leto took this a step further and terraformed Arrakis in accordance with the Fremen dream of a green paradise, which left him as the final Sandworm on all of Dune. Upon Leto's death, the sand trout that had formed his worm body scattered to the sands and restarted the cycle of sandworm proliferation. Only these new sandworms contained a pearl of his consciousness within them, which made them even more dangerous than they used to be. In the end, Arrakis was nuked by the honored Matres, whom we talk about in a different video, and it was believed for the longest time that all sandworms had died on the planet. However, in the final book of the official Dune saga, it's revealed that the nuking of Arrakis didn't make its sandworms go extinct. That's because they burrowed so deep into the crust of the planet that they remained untouched by radiation. In Sandworms of Dune, re-emerged after spending several millennia locked underneath the surface, and this event is what makes their presence on other planets possible. Following the death of the God Emperor, humanity exploded across the cosmos, but the old power brokers of the Imperium, like the Tleilaxu and the Bene Gesserit, stayed put to maintain control of a fractured empire. Both factions were attacked by the honored Matres and heretics of Dune, and both factions, plus the Spacing Guild, still needed spice to give them an advantage over this unknown enemy. Before Arrakis, or Rakis as it's called in Heretics, was nuked by the Matres, a small contingent being led by the Reverend Mother Darwi Odrade and recent Bene Gesserit recruit Shiana Brugh managed to smuggle a single sandworm off of Dune. That sandworm became the seed for sandworm colonies on 2 other planets, starting with Chapter House. The secret, temporary headquarters of the Bene Gesserit was established as a response to what happened to their original homeworld. The Sisterhood started on the highly deadly planet called Rossack, which was just as bad as Arrakis in its own way. But once their meddling in Imperial affairs and their use of banned technology was discovered, they decided they would no longer stay put in one place. So, over the years, many planets have taken on the title of Chapter House, with the current one having been the Sisterhood's base since around the time of Leto II's death. After escaping with a sandworm from Arrakis, Shiana seeds it on Chapter House, a large part of which has been terraformed into a desert for its sustenance. Under her oversight, the number of sandworms increases exponentially, with at least half a dozen of them popping up by the time Chapter House Dune reached its climactic stage. Shiana's unique ability to command the sandworms plays a massive role in their proliferation as well as preservation, because the ending of Frank Herbert's final Dune novel is somewhat controversial. Thanks to the successful conversion of the honored Matres Murbella, the Sisterhood gains the means to infiltrate Matre society and usurp their leadership. But this plan is kept secret by Mother Superior Darwe Odrade because she knows many of her sisters won't go for it due to their inherent bias against the Matres. In the final sequence of events from that novel, Murbella manages to wrest away leadership of the Matres from the hardliner Lognos by displaying her superior strength and killing her with relative ease. This gives her leadership of the Order, which prioritizes strength over everything else and allows her to merge it with those Bene Gesserit who are willing to put their differences aside and lead the universe into a new age. The emergence of the new Sisterhood coincides with Shiana escaping Chapter House with the latest Duncan Idaho Gola, a few other characters, and 7 sandworms of varying sizes aboard the no-ship Ithaca. This vessel becomes the temporary home of those 7 sandworms for several decades as they try to escape persecution from their former allies and the Matre's enemies, and it's during this period of exile that the plan to seed these 7 sandworms on the homeworld of their common enemy is born. Synchrony! On the Ithaca, Shiana Brugh, the orchestrator of the escape plan, decides to create golas of several powerful figures from across human history. One of these figures is Leto II himself, which is a dangerous move considering the relationship he has with the Sandworms. Though the Sisterhood believed that with Arrakis destroyed, Leto's pearl of consciousness within the Sandworms would die as well, but that wasn't the case. As long as one of them survived, so would the God Emperor's original mind. And that's exactly what allows Shiana to command the Sandworms in the first place. With the creation of a Leto II Gola, the plan to destroy humanity's ultimate enemy, the thinking machines, is put into motion. Because, unlike Shiana, Leto's pearl of consciousness allows him to truly commune with the Sandworms aboard the Ithaca. Of the 7 Sandworms Shiana stole from Chapter House, only one grows to the size of a sandworm of old. This 60-meter monstrosity is called Monarch, but it isn't hostile to the inhabitants of the No Ship because it knows that they're stuck together for decades on end. Hostility towards the humans would inevitably lead to Monarch and his brethren's demise, and he couldn't allow that to happen because they communally decided to elect him their leader. In the final 2 Dune novels, penned by Frank Herbert, we see how Leto and Monarch became connected to one another on an unconscious level. Gola Leto's life is quite different from the actual Leto himself because he knows what his golden path has done to the universe, unlike the God Emperor who could only hope that it would make the changes he wanted it to. The consequence of this connection is that Gola Leto decides to become a sandworm once more, but this time he does it out of choice, not prophetic duty, and before he can go off into the sands in peace, he leads one of the key assaults on Kralizek, aka the Typhoon Struggle. Once it's discovered that the Matres were fleeing the thinking machines, the good guys came up with a plan to dismantle the machine empire using the very worms they were trying to protect. Those efforts culminated in the Ithaca's arrival at Synchrony, the machine empire's capital world. And while Duncan Idaho confronted Omnius at the place called Cathedral, Gola Leto unleashed Monarch and his sandworm brethren upon the world. After the war was won by Duncan's merger with Erasmus, who betrayed his master in favor of humanity, the Sandworms of Synchrony decided to burrow into its crust and began the terraforming process of the planet. So, by the time the official Dune books end, there are 3 planets with sandworms on them: Arrakis, Chapter House, and Synchrony, the new center of the universe. This is about as good of an ending as these creatures could have gotten, considering they were on the verge of extinction when the Muad'Ru brought them to Dune. The Sandworms went from being venerated as gods to being feared as demons, and finally being accepted for what they truly were, a species of creatures much like any other in the universe. And for that, we're sure they were grateful. Marvelous verdict! But if you were hoping for more entries on this list, we're afraid we've got some bad news for you. These are the only 3 planets where sandworms existed in the collective Duneverse, but we bet that's 2 more than you knew about before. So now that we've spoken of every planet where sandworms existed, we want to know your thoughts on the same. Let us know in the comments section down below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more Dune content, and of course, we'll see you guys in the next one. Until next time, stay safe,